All right, we're now going to move on to our featured speaker today, Mr. Byron Holland, and many of you will know Byron. He's going to be speaking to us about the state of Canada's internet and how CIRA has been working to build a better internet for all of us. Byron has been the president and CEO of CIRA since 2008, and in that time he's led the organization to become one of the leading and most respected top-level domain registries in Canada. He's a Canadian entrepreneur, an expert in international governance, and he's working to ensure that Canadian values are represented in global debates and discussion, and he's a tireless defender of a free and open internet, both in Canada and abroad. All good things. Byron, please come to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thank you, David. And welcome, everybody. Welcome today to Canadians Connected 2016. Thanks for joining us, especially on, of course, a beautiful September day. And wow, I thought that was very cool, what Andy just told us. You know, I love working at CIRA. I think we do some great work and we have a lot of fun, but it's also a real privilege to be able to participate in supporting organizations like that, especially when you see the kind of work that they're doing. And with a few kids of my own, you know, I hope that STEAM Labs is going to come to Ottawa sometime soon. Anyway, thanks, pardon me, thanks again for joining us here today. I always love being back in Toronto. I lived here for quite some time, and I left in 2008. And, you know, much of my job takes me to places outside of Canada, so I don't get back to Toronto nearly as often as I'd like to. But I'm always struck when I come back, usually flying into the city airport, of the building and development that has happened between the Gardiner and the railway tracks, all those condos, and what, you know, when I lived here was basically kind of a wasteland and a pretty good driving range. But, you know, there was nothing there. And now, 2008 wasn't that long ago. There's probably 50,000 units, dozens of new apartment buildings. I mean, the level of development is incredible that's been going on here. And to some degree, of course, I look at that and think, you know, how has that space been future-proofed, right? How has it been networked? What's the transit look like? How's security? And all of those words have real resonance in my world, in the digital world. And I look at that and think, is that kind of like a physical manifestation almost of the internet space? And how do you future-proof that kind of incredible and rapid development? And that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today. Because of the space that we occupy, we get to see and feel and participate in a lot of what's happening in the internet space in Canada, for sure, but also from a global perspective. And I want to talk a little bit about what we see coming towards us from an internet perspective, and then also weave a bit into that narrative of how CIRA participates in that, and of course how all of us as CIRA members or people interested in CIRA and the .ca space can participate. You know, it's a really interesting time, I think, to be working in the internet sector in Canada. There's lots of great opportunities happening. There's lots of opportunity for growth and innovation. And certainly at CIRA, we're always looking for ways that we can help engage, catalyze, or participate, much like we've done with STEAM Labs and others. But this isn't that; those things aren't the whole story of what we do and also what we need to do. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been up to recently. You know, this past year we launched the Internet Performance Test, and what that does is give users a real end-to-end performance evaluation of their internet connection. Not just speed, but also the quality of their connection. And I'll dig into some specifics later in the talk, but the initial data that we're seeing suggests that, you know, in some areas of Canada, we actually have speeds and performance that rival the best in the world. But in some areas of Canada, we are much further behind. Without a doubt, in rural Canada, there's some issues. But also in major cities, because our test can drill down literally neighborhood by neighborhood, postal walk by postal walk, we can really get a feel for how the internet is performing at a very, very localized level. You know, it was really interesting listening to Andy, just moving on to how the skills side of the equation is transpiring in Canada. You know, we work with a number of folks and groups, and STEAM Labs is a good example. And I think Canadian schools are doing some good work in preparing kids with the skills that they need. And I'm certainly genuinely hopeful for the future, but without a doubt, there are gaps, and Andy talked about some of them. You know, as an employer who's constantly seeking tech workers, in our case, pretty sophisticated, experienced tech workers, it is a constant struggle to find those people. And these are good, well-paying, expert jobs, and yet finding those skill sets in Canada is profoundly difficult. So, you know, what can we do to help on that front? You know, we, I think, at CIRA have an ambitious plan to do our part to help build a better online Canada. And I know there's many allies in the room. I see some of them, and I know everybody here is here to this event because they're interested in this issue. So let's talk about some of the data around how the internet is performing in Canada. And, you know, let's also take a look at how Canada's doing from a global comparator perspective. And then throughout the day, or throughout the next half hour, I'll be able to walk us from a global perspective, literally right down to a postal walk perspective. So this past June at CIRA's annual Canadian Internet Forum, we heard directly from some representatives from the OECD who provided us with some insights into how does Canada stack up? How are we doing on internet and mobile speeds, performance, price? And I'd say the good news on aggregate from a broadband perspective, we're doing okay. Not great, but solid. We're in the middle of the pack, and we've seen some progress there. But when we start to unpack it, that's where we start to see this is not a universal experience. Yes, this is the aggregate data, but it's not what every Canadian experiences and feels. And the other thing when you look at that list, and I've certainly said this before at other events, we're doing okay, but we have been passed by many global competitors in this ecosystem, by other OECD countries. You know, we look at the Nordics. The Nordic countries in general are doing very well. And we don't have to go back very far to be at a point where Canada was the lead and all the Nordic countries were behind us. And it's not like we're going backwards, of course. We continue to improve. But the fact is that many other countries are making much more significant investments with much more intentional strategies to drive their internet forward. South Korea is also doing very well on that front. The story's not as good, however, when we go to mobile. And you can see there the red line, of course, is Canada. And this matters more than just, in a sense, from our national pride perspective. As I'm sure everybody in this audience knows, mobile is the future of the internet. It's already, of course, washing over us, and more subscribers, more and more people are accessing the internet by mobile in Canada, for sure, and in large swaths of the world, it's already far and away the leading point of access to the internet. And we most definitely have some work to do when it comes to performance, but especially price there. We're operating in a global landscape here, and we need to be competitive so we can communicate, we can collaborate, and we can work with other Canadians better and faster. And like I said, be more competitive. When we look at the pan-Canadian data, we get something of a mixed result, almost like we've seen, you know, between broadband and mobile, mixed results for Canada. When we look at fixed line in Canada, we also get a fairly mixed result. So when you look at the chart in front of you, overall, Speed looks pretty reasonable. It's not blinding by any stretch, but it's decent. That's what we see at the aggregate level. But again, as we unpack it, we see a very patchy network of networks in Canada. Now that's pure performance. And performance, of course, is important, but then there's quality. I'm sure everybody here has had that Netflix experience as you sit there and it stutters or it hangs and you're waiting for your show. That's pretty much a universal Canadian experience. And to some degree, that's not about performance and speed. That's about quality. Ping and jitter and a number of other metrics, all of which we capture in our internet performance test. But that's where our infrastructure definitely has some work to do. When we think about future-proofing the infrastructure, like we're trying to future-proof our kids, IPv6, we are way down the list of adoption. And a lot of people think, well, IPv6, how important is that? I mean, quite frankly, most people say, what is IPv6? In this room, I'm sure it's relatively well known, but the key for IPv6 is if we don't have IPv6 adoption, we don't get to do Internet of Things. And everybody wants to do Internet of Things, but if you don't have the addresses available, you don't get to put all those devices on the Internet. And also, of course, security is a big one. As many of you here, I'm sure, heard, the Internet can be a slightly dangerous space, so making sure that we have as secure and robust and resilient a network as possible is also critical. And CIRA is very involved in DNSSEC adoption, which is a security protocol that can help make sure that the entity on the other end of the line from you is in fact who they say they are. Even here in Toronto, in the heart of Toronto, we see mixed results. And this is a preliminary map that I wanted to show with you based on the early analysis of our data from the Internet Performance Test. And what this does is essentially heat map by neighborhood Internet performance. So let me just put out a bit of a proviso. Our test thus far has gathered 200,000 samples, 200,000 individual tests. That's a lot of tests. And in a lot of neighborhoods, we have very good data. But it's still early days, so it is preliminary data. But what this shows you effectively is red is slow, blue is fast, white is somewhere in the middle. And what I think is interesting about this, most of us would consider downtown Toronto probably to be a very well networked and wired place, and yet even neighborhood by neighborhood, it varies significantly. So we can see up and down the Yonge corridor in downtown, we see lots of blue. But then we'll also see neighborhoods almost right next door where we see red with very slow speeds. Now, we continue to need to do more tests to really have the number of tests required to be truly confident in the numbers, but it's early days. So, sorry about that. I will make this shameless plug. Please help us get more data so we can have more, better, and deeper insight into the internet in Canada. So if you go here, it's a simple test. It'll show you your neighborhood, your street, and depending how deep you want to go and how much of a technologist you are, it actually captures about 100 data points around that connection. Of course, the main ones of interest are going to be around speed and quality, and whether it's IPv6 or DNSSEC enabled. All of those things you can see there. Anybody who's tweeting today, please feel free to tweet this out to your networks. Part of CIRA's mandate is to help, of course, improve both the performance, but also the security of Canadians online. And that's always been a critical part of what we're trying to do, a safe, secure, and resilient Canadian internet. And we're certainly seeing more and more evolving threats in the internet landscape in Canada. In fact, our colleagues at VeriSign, the folks who are behind .com, have reported a more than 200% increase in the past year in terms of DDoS attack size. So the size of the attacks are just relentlessly increasing. And 75% of those attacks are now reaching over a gig a second. So, for those technologists in the room, those are meaningful and substantive attacks that you need to be well prepared for and well defended to withstand. Shows the relentlessness, the sophistication, and the capacity of the bad guys. And 65% of those attacks, roughly, are not just from a single vector, sort of one point of entry. They come from multiple points of entry simultaneously. And that means not only is your network under significant weight of the attack, but they're trying to get at you from multiple access points simultaneously, which of course is a dangerous situation to be in if you're a network operator or an organization who relies on your network, or a small business who relies on your network. We're not immune from this reality at CIRA by any stretch. And the growing threats that we see and we experience have motivated kind of our unrelenting focus on the DNS, or the domain name system, and its security for CIRA and .ca in specific. And that has led us to develop a much more comprehensive and robust Canadian Anycast DNS infrastructure. And thanks to the use of multiple nodes across Canada, as well as a growing network around the world, our Anycast network really functions as a truly Canadian infrastructure to help prevent attacks or to help mitigate attacks, be they from foreign or domestic sources. That's what's kind of happening at a very high level on the security front. But you know, CIRA is also going through a very turbulent time in the domain name industry, the actual core of what we do. The era of high growth for what I'm going to call legacy operators, and it's sort of funny to think of us. I mean, the internet's such a relatively recent phenomenon. We're a relatively new company overall. But in our space, we're a legacy operator. And where we used to experience 15, 20% growth regularly year after year, that is starting to flatline. And not just for us, but for our entire industry. This chart gives you a sense in terms of how other CCTLDs are doing. So this looks at some of our colleagues around the world, Germany in particular, which is the largest CCTLD, France, another large one, Poland. So in a sense, some potentially like organizations in Western democracies. And what you can see is that for the industry as a whole, and the timeline is over roughly the last 9 years, it has been down and to the right, and these organizations in particular are experiencing zero or negative growth. So from a certain sense, or a certain perspective, we can see the future. That's the future. CIRA has resisted that curve. We are still generating new growth, putting new domain names in the hands of Canadians every year, but inevitably we can't buck the industry trend indefinitely, even though we're at the top of the heap, because we can see the future. There are many reasons for this. Maturation of the industry itself, certainly one of them. But also over the past year, new GTLDs have really been introduced into the ecosystem. And new GTLDs are something that the community's been working on for the past couple of years. But last year, and I'm just going to note that the slides aren't advancing. Harder to make the point about new GTLDs. But nonetheless, keep me on my toes. Nonetheless, about a year ago, there was about 7 million new generic top-level domains that were actually in the market. So those are the folks who came out with all kinds of new extensions to the right of the .web, there we go, thank you, .web, .ninja, .sports, .ski, I mean there was 1,000 new ones, plus all the brands, .oracle, .ibm. But at this meeting a year ago, there was roughly 7 million that had entered the market, 7 million domain names under those new generic top-level domains. Today there's 23 million. So while it's proven to be a much tougher business than many had anticipated, we are still seeing significant growth. And interestingly, while still a small percentage, we've seen that Canada has adopted new GTLDs far faster than our other kind of Western comparable countries. So while the percentage is still small, we're actually doing it faster than anybody else in our OECD comparators. But overall, it's definitely proven a tougher business than most expected. There are GTLDs like .xyz, which was made most famous by Google. So when they restructured their organization and their holding company became Alphabet, they rebranded Google on .xyz, and their URL is abc.xyz. Now, of those 1,000 new generic top-level domains, there's only 425 that have more than 1,000 domains under management. Interestingly, though, where we've seen some of the most successful ones have been rooted in specific communities, and geographic communities in particular, which is important when you think about what is .ca, which is a geographic community. But where we're seeing success with the new GTLDs in particular is around cities. So .Berlin, .Tokyo, .NYC. Those are some of the most successful new generic top-level domains. And that's where you're starting to see businesses and organizations and governments adopt those new top-level domains because they're more specific or more germane to their communities. They're more locally relevant, perhaps. Our industry is changing rapidly, and CIRA is definitely evolving with it. And as a result, this year we took a really close look at what is the strategy of CIRA. We've been very good at operating a safe, secure, resilient network, DNS, registry operations. But as we see our growth flatline, as we see 1,000 new competitors, as the cost of defending this space ever increases, how else could we provide value for the .ca space, but also for the general Canadian internet ecosystem? And together with our board, we undertook a major strategic review and set about creating a new strategic plan for the next 4 or so years of this organization's lifespan. And we tried to make it pretty straightforward, right? The focus of our organization will be around innovate, operate, donate. How do we respond to the new? How can we be at the leading edge of all things internet in Canada, at least as they're germane to our expertise? How do we continue to do job one, which is safe, secure, stable .ca? And how do we give back to the community? And I think we saw a great example of some of the ways we give back to the community just before me with Andy. Canadians use the .ca space to act as their online home, basically to communicate, to collaborate, to create businesses, applications, deliver innovation, all of those things. Governments use us to link to their communities to deliver services. Same with NGOs who represent Canada around the world. Because .ca is not just about inside our geographic barriers, or boundaries rather. It's also how do we present ourselves to the rest of the world? How do you identify yourself as Canadian to the rest of the world? What's that sort of digital equivalent of the flag on the backpack? And it was really critical for us to find ways for CIRA to sustainably deliver that in the context of an ever-changing ecosystem, threat profiles, maturing market, et cetera. And to this end, we've really worked to diversify the resources that we have at our disposal. When we met last year in Vancouver, we were effectively a one-product company. We sold .ca domain names. That's no longer the case. CIRA now runs what we would argue, is the most advanced DNS offering in Canada. When we looked at the DNS ecosystem or market in Canada a year ago or prior, there really wasn't a Canadian company with a truly Canadian infrastructure footprint. There's certainly Canadian companies who operate infrastructure around the world, but if you wanted to actually have domestic footprint, and many organizations do, because they have sovereignty concerns, or they want to make sure that there's higher performance to local customers, more resiliency, or data sovereignty, many different reasons. There are a number of organizations that would be very important to, not the least of which is actually CIRA, because in a sense, of course, we have to be willing to eat our own dog food. And we run CA on this infrastructure. As of the end of our fiscal year, of course this is the AGM, so our fiscal year was March 31st, April 1st. So as of the end of that year, we had 86 enterprise level customers on DZone, the DNS product. And when I say enterprise level, that was cities, municipalities, universities, hospitals. Those are the markets that we went after first. So large scale organizations. As of today, we have about 125, but at the end of the year, we were 86. And we have either in that group or shortly to be announced, deals in place to deliver services to almost all of Canada's research and education networks. So the CIRAs or the Orions or the research R&E networks in Canada. Locally here in Toronto, we're now the secondary DNS provider for Sunnybrook, which is only one hospital, but it's certainly one of the major ones in Canada and locally. And we're also working with our channel partners, our registrars, et cetera, to provide them a different level of service and access to this product so they can in turn sell it into the small and medium-sized business market and make sure that the small and medium enterprise in Canada is equally covered. Keeping me on my toes. The slides are not matching my cadence. And I pick on DZone because while each individual organization benefits, DNS as an overall infrastructure, it's critically important that every organization is well protected because any weak link can actually impact the entire system. If a vulnerability can be found, it can potentially let bad actors in and spread to other parts of the network. So in a sense, floating one boat higher floats all boats higher. That's just one of the things that we've done over the past year. Another is that we just recently completed the next generation of our registry platform. And it will be the next generation of the platform that CIRA resides on. And that has completely transformed how we will be able to deliver .ca services, which we will be porting .ca over to this platform in the next 18 months or so. But the other thing is we made that a multi-tenant environment. In other words, we can run other registries on top of that, not just .ca. But we've certainly used all our .ca expertise to do exactly that. And in fact, we've just announced our first new customer that will be using that platform, .kiwi. It's a generic top-level domain, and they will be porting over from their existing infrastructure onto the new registry, the new CIRA Registry Services infrastructure this fall. So it's a small customer. It's a perfect first customer for us. It allows us to try the registry platform in a production environment before we move .ca back onto the next generation platform. Hopefully registry expertise can be our next great national export. This momentum around the continued growth of .ca and the commercial launches of DZone and our new registry platform, I would say that we're the result of or the outcome of our 2014 to 2016 strategic plan. We saw the market changing and we adapted to that, and we determined several years ago to actually enter these new spaces. And it's turned out, I think, to be very fortuitous, as the actual slowing of growth in the market has significantly accelerated compared to even what we expected several years ago. All of these changes led us to think about what else can we do to deliver on our mandate. So we spent a great deal of time thinking about that. We deliver.ca, but what else can we do? And as we worked on this new plan, we thought about how much other value could our expertise and our infrastructure bring to the Canadian landscape. And as we worked on that with the board, we started to work towards what can our next generation high-level goals be, and they're on the slide in front of you. But at the end of the day, the key part here is to build a world-class Canadian internet. Not a pretty good, not a middle of the road, not a fairly competitive, but a truly world-class internet infrastructure. And to that point, the board has approved that plan exactly. And that has allowed us to create that vision for what the next generation of CIRA looks like. So what does this look like in practice? We're starting to think about how can we help municipalities, right? How can we help them be smarter and more efficient? You hear the term smart cities. Well, what is that? Does CIRA have a role to play? Which it most definitely does. And the smart cities movement, I think, is generating an interesting dialogue on how technology can help improve our everyday and day-to-day lives. And there's many interesting examples of how this is happening. .NYC, one of the new GTLDs I talked about, has the regional government, the government of New York, got that GTLD and is now providing a lot of information back to its citizens on what's happening in New York. A lot of data that was collected but not easily consumed. So be it traffic, be it construction, or lots of other event-based issues are now all residing on a specific site at .nyc. So this is about municipalities and governments providing access and information to their communities in a much more accessible way. In Calgary, bringing it back home, that's a city that, as we all know, has experienced a significant level of flooding over the years. And recently, Calgary has put in 200 plus sensors all up and down the Bow River that helps the city in real time understand the changing water levels and allows them to act in real time as they see the water levels changing and can make real time decisions to help mitigate the adverse impacts of flooding. So these types of solutions are premised on the availability of network connectivity. The network provides the raw material on which all these applications get built. And CIRA is very much working to help Canadian communities understand how to approach their next generation internet architectures. And we certainly believe that municipalities and local governments can significantly benefit from the deep knowledge that CIRA has, resident in our walls, and our approach to public interest, not-for-profit technology solutions. CIRA has long been a supporter of internet exchange points. Anybody who's been to one of these events before knows that we participate very actively in internet exchange points, and we've been catalytic in setting up a number of them across the country to help create a faster, higher performing, more resilient, more sovereign internet experience in Canada. And these domestic exchanges allow us to get peered content in Canada faster, better, cheaper. And that is a critical outcome of being involved in setting up IXPs in Canada. And they can go right down to the city level and help almost any size city improve the internet experience and the delivery of content. Because where often a request made at your browser might have to travel to New York or Seattle to be resolved and then brought back to you. Now, even if you're in Sudbury and Sudbury has an IXP, that content is brought back to you immediately. I mean, I know the speed of light is fast, but nonetheless, those kinds of distances impact performance and speed and, of course, sovereignty of the data. Not only that, what we have seen in areas where we have been catalytic in putting in IXPs, like Winnipeg, for example, the whole ecosystem starts to change around it. Transit came to Winnipeg. So that allowed real access to the internet, not to somebody else's network and somebody else's network that then got you to the internet, which is essentially what they had in Winnipeg. But we literally brought the internet to Winnipeg. And not only that, in terms of speed and performance, but because there was greater competition, we actually saw the wholesale price for transit, or for peering, or for transit rather, go from about $50 to $5 a meg. So the impact was dramatic in that particular city. And we've seen that in other places as well. And internet exchanges are really how CIRA is starting to impact Canadian communities in terms of becoming smarter communities. You know, I spoke earlier about our internet performance test and how it's helping Canadians understand their internet connections, performance, quality, et cetera. We're now partnering with communities across Canada to help them understand their internet performance and how they might better manage their networks, or where they might want to incent ISPs to act and to go. You know, this summer we worked with a team called iValley. They're out of Nova Scotia in the Annapolis Valley, and we created a portal specifically for them, their geography, their region, et cetera, and have used that mapping tool to really help them understand how the internet is performing in their region and allowing them to be better informed in how they make significant infrastructure investments in the Annapolis Valley. That's just one real tangible example of how we're helping decision makers make smart decisions for their internet infrastructure and resources. The next is around security. You know, we have built this program with IXPs and internet performance testing as critical success factors, but we're also very, very focused on security and making sure that organizations are well versed in terms of how to provide proper security, to be DNSSEC compliant, et cetera, especially in what can be vulnerable organizations like school boards or hospitals, universities, municipalities, et cetera. Because poor decisions made there can be amplified to the broader community. You know, we have brought that kind of infrastructure to the table today, but now we're also helping them understand from the perspective of a leading Canadian TLD operator, what might the future look like from a top-level domain perspective for regions and cities. And that's how we're helping cities and municipalities understand whether they may or may not be interested in getting their own city top-level domain, a .Toronto, .Vancouver, .Sudbury. It can be something of a daunting process for those who aren't particularly well versed in how all of this works. So we provide a lot of insight and help to municipalities to help them understand, is this a worthwhile investment for us? Will it be useful for our citizens, for the region? So all of those are the areas in which we are helping position Canada, position our regions, position our municipalities for the future of the internet as we see it, around improved security, improved performance, resiliency, redundancy, better costs, and also data retention within Canadian boundaries. So that gives you just a sense of some of the issues that we're seeing, what's coming to us from an internet perspective, and how CIRA is working in different fields to continue to build on our mandate, which is to build a better online Canada. Thank you.